Breaking overnight, the number of coronavirus cases in the U.S. tops 1,000 as the first containment zone in the U.S. is set up right outside New York City. The National Guard called in. Google and Apple now telling their employees to work from home. The New York Times clearing out their newsroom. More big schools close. Harvard orders students to move out of their dorms. Now, will March Madness be canceled?
The new numbers this morning about how few of those coronavirus tests have been administered in the U.S. so far. Health officials now racing to get those tests out. The president saying that there are enough to go around, but doctors struggling to get what they need. The Secretary of Health and Human Services is here live with answers.
In Italy, a healthcare crisis. ICUs overflowing. Hospitals building tents outside their doors to treat patients, as police are now enforcing the country's massive lockdown in the race to contain the outbreak.
Also this morning, Biden's big win. The former vice president takes a commanding lead in the race for the Democratic nomination, racking up huge victories over Bernie Sanders in Michigan and the South. The big question now, how long can Sanders stay in?
Dangerous storms moving across the country. Flash flooding causing chaos on the roads. The massive 13-car pileup. And the new threat this morning, tornado concerns for hard-hit Nashville. And extraordinary Earth going to an icy extreme, heading way out to an ice flow.
I am on an ice flow in the middle of the Northwest Atlantic,
where harp seals have their pups. The rare up-close view coming face-to-face with these incredible animals. Why our warming planet has them on thin ice. GMA is live from Prince Edward Island.
Live in Times Square, this is Good Morning America.
And Good Morning America, boy, what TJ is going to show us truly is extraordinary.
Right, about that.
That is coming up. We want to get right to the breaking news overnight on the coronavirus emergency.
As you said moments ago, George, cases in the U.S. crossing 1,000 overnight with at least 30 deaths. More than 1,000 schools shutting their doors, affecting 775,000 students all across the country.
18 states have declared a state of emergency, including Massachusetts, where the number of coronavirus cases doubled in just the past day. And now the IRS is even considering moving the tax deadline past April 15th.
But we're going to begin with that community just outside of New York City under a containment order this morning, where a cluster of cases has broken out. The National Guard will be on duty there in New Rochelle to help enforce the 1-mile radius under the order. Whit Johnson is there with the latest. Good morning, Whit.
Michael, good morning. Officials tell us about 100 to 200 members of the National Guard will arrive here in New Rochelle tomorrow to help clean and sanitize schools, public areas, and even deliver food if needed. Governor Cuomo calling this deployment a dramatic effort to attack this outbreak at the source.
This morning, New York ordering the nation's first containment zone as the number of those infected continues to climb. The governor deploying the National Guard to New Rochelle, a suburban coronavirus hotspot north of Manhattan.
It is a dramatic action. This is literally a matter of life and death.
That zone consisting of a 1-mile radius around the Young Israel Synagogue, where dozens of people were exposed by that infected attorney. Schools and buildings that hold large gatherings will shut down for 2 weeks. But most businesses and grocery stores will remain open, and people will be able to enter and leave the area.
You're not containing people, it's facilities.
According to some residents, many are staying home.
It's empty. I was there, and I'm there usually every weekend running errands. Stores were empty, and there's no one around.
Among the new cases statewide, 2 school bus drivers testing positive. Across the country, the death toll rising to at least 30, and at least 18 states declaring a state of emergency. Washington State reporting at least 10 nursing homes with confirmed cases. Infections in Massachusetts more than doubling, with at least 70 of the cases connected to a Biogen employee conference held in Boston last month. And in Minnesota, a 30-year-old patient now in critical condition after experiencing flu symptoms and visiting a health facility last week, but was sent home without testing.
You have to start taking seriously what you can do now, that if and when the infections will come, and they will come.
Concerns of the spreading virus prompting a wave of cancellations, including the New York City Half Marathon and the Ivy League basketball tournaments. Popular music festivals postponed until October to avoid crowd contamination. Major companies like Apple and Google encouraging their employees to work from home. And universities like UCLA, Duke, and Ohio State University are canceling in-person classes. Harvard University forcing students to move out of the dorms and take online classes instead.
Many of us are international students from countries where the coronavirus has basically halted all travel.
And the New York Times launching a deep cleaning of their newsroom in New York and D.C., notifying employees to stay home for 14 days after some New York Times staffers attended a conference in New Orleans, where an attendee not with the paper tested positive for coronavirus.
Despite assurances from the federal government, many local officials are still frustrated with the backlog and red tape when it comes to testing. In fact, we spoke to one infectious disease doctor in Massachusetts who says he has multiple patients showing possible symptoms and he still can't get them tested. Robin?
All right, well, thank you. As we know, the world is fighting to contain the outbreak. We're going to take a live look at the cases around the globe. This according to the Johns Hopkins tracker. Almost 1,000 and 20,000 worldwide. One of the areas hit the hardest is Italy, with the most cases of any country outside of China, now topping 10,000 with 631 deaths. James Longman has more on the conditions under lockdown in Italy after returning from there himself. Good morning, James.
Hi, Robin. Yeah, good morning. I'm going to self-isolate now for a while. It's just the most sensible thing to do after having returned from Italy, which is facing, as you say, the biggest crisis anywhere in the world outside of China. More than 10,000 cases now in that country. More than 600 people have died. The hospitals are just overwhelmed. We're seeing images of tents being built outside them in order to treat the ill. ICUs are overflowing. This is an assault on the elderly population of Italy. They are the overwhelming victims here. And so this lockdown that we're seeing in that country is really unprecedented. The police are enforcing it. Schools are shut. 60 million people, more than 60 million people live in Italy. Just think about that. Landmarks across the country. This is a huge tourist destination, and they are all deserted today. And here in the UK, we're seeing the fallout continue with a health minister now testing positive for the virus. And it's emerged that she actually met with the Prime Minister the day before she was tested. There's a lot to worry about here in Europe. Michael?
A lot to worry about indeed, James. Thank you so much for that. And now to the big question over testing for the virus here in the U.S. President Trump has said anyone who wants to get tested can, but an ABC News analysis shows just over 6,800 tests have been administered in the U.S. as opposed to 200,000 in much smaller South Korea. Steve Ozensami is outside CDC headquarters in Atlanta with more on where the tests are. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning to you, Michael. Here at the CDC, they tell us that most of the tests that were first available went to the states of Washington and California, where they were needed the most. Since then, these tests can't be produced fast enough. As fear and panic over the coronavirus sweep the country, the president is reassuring Americans that there are enough coronavirus tests to go around.
When people need a test, they can get a test. When the professionals need a test, when they need tests for people, they can get the test.
Vice President Pence is saying the same, announcing that millions are being shipped.
We want people to get tested. Over 1 million tests are out, thanks to the diligent work of CDC and HHS. More than 4 million will go out this week.
But this morning, some doctors are saying that despite government assurances, they can't get the tests they need.
When you know that there's community transmission, that means there's a lot more undiagnosed cases than diagnosed cases. So we really have to up our level of testing.
The test is a simple nose swab that's processed in a lab like this one in New York State. But which patients actually get one of these tests is more complicated. The decision is usually made by state governments using CDC recommendations that the only people who should get a coronavirus test are people who have symptoms, have come into close contact with someone who has the virus, or have traveled to an affected area like China, Italy, or South Korea. So far, nearly 7,000 people have been tested here in America. In contrast, South Korea has already tested more than 200,000 people. As tests become more available, some states like Washington and Colorado are setting up drive-through testing locations, hoping that a test in a drive-through will limit the risk of contamination and prevent the spread of germs in a hospital. Two of the most famous residents in Washington state are trying to help. Bill and Melinda Gates are reportedly working on a coronavirus test that can be used at home. George.
Thank you, Steve. We're joined now by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. Secretary Azar, thank you for joining us this morning. As we just heard, there are still so many issues surrounding testing here in the United States. We're still hearing from doctors they can't get the tests they need. So just lay out the bottom lines right now. How many Americans have been tested? How many will be tested? And what is that likely to mean for the number of cases here in the United States?
So, George, the key thing your viewers need to know is that we have and always have had the capacity to test anybody who's suspected of novel coronavirus. Right now, we have millions of tests available. Anybody who's a person under investigation, suspected by medical professionals or by public health officials, is going to get tested, will get tested, and will get that data if they're a positive case.
Let's talk about these containment measures we're seeing. New Rochelle being contained right now. Washington State expected to announce today really a ban on any kind of large gatherings. And Dr. Fauci was pretty sober yesterday afternoon. How much more of this are we going to need? More of these containment measures are we going to need to prevent a big spike in cases?
Yeah, George, we're going to see very aggressive efforts to try to mitigate and contain this situation. We commend New York. We commend Washington. We're embedded with them, working closely. In fact, today, we're going to be releasing the CDC's recommendations to various jurisdictions that have had clusters. And we're going to lean in. As the vice president said, we're going to be always recommending fairly aggressive measures, because if we can slow the spread, if we can contain these clusters in certain communities, bring that speed down, the hope, of course, is that, like most respiratory diseases, as we get to warmer weather, as people disperse and just naturally distance themselves with outdoor activities, etc., this can help actually slow things down. So we're working always to buy time so that we mitigate impact here in the United States.
So does that mean events like the NCAA tournament are going to have to be rescheduled?
I think any type of large gatherings have to be assessed by the organizers, but it needs to be considered in community context. But then each of us as individuals, we need to assess whether it makes sense for us to go to large gatherings. And we have made it clear, if you're elderly and are medically fragile, or if you're medically fragile generally of any age, you really should avoid large gatherings. You should avoid long travel, certainly avoid getting on a cruise ship. So always think about your own situation, the circumstances of your community, and the nature of what you're planning to do.
You mentioned the timeline. This all began in China, of course. They're slowly starting to turn things around there, although there's been some back and forth right there. Can you give people a sense of where we are here in the United States with that timeline? Is this the beginning, the middle, the beginning of the end?
So, China's gotten this very much, very aggressive action. I think they had only 46 new cases the other day, but we're seeing a real explosion of cases in Europe. We're seeing increasing cases here in the United States, which we've been clear we would see. We're still, I'd say, in the beginnings of the spread of this disease in the United States, but that's why we're taking such aggressive containment measures at the border, as well as mitigation steps in local communities, as I said, to try to slow the spread. We need to be really clear. We've been clear from the start. We're going to see more cases. This is a virus. This will spread. We need to take steps to slow that, buy ourselves time. Every day we buy is a valuable day in terms of spreading, and that's why aggressive efforts are needed and public cooperation is important.
Secretary Azar, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, George.
Boy, that was a pretty sobering headline there from the Secretary, just the beginnings of the spread here in the United States.
We heard that loud and clear, George. Thank you. The outbreak also impacting the race for the White House, both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders canceling events in Cleveland, but it was another big Tuesday for the former vice president, winning at least 4 of 6 contests, including the key state of Michigan, and putting Biden in command of the Democratic presidential nomination. Mary Bruce is tracking all the latest for us from Washington. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Robin. Well, this was a massive night for Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders had hoped to blunt Biden's rise, but instead, the former vice president dominated the night. And this morning, he is now closing in on the nomination. Taking the biggest prize of the night, Joe Biden this morning says he's unstoppable.
Tonight, we are a step closer to restoring decency, dignity, and honor to the White House. That's our ultimate goal.
The former vice president celebrating his decisive victory in the key industrial state of Michigan. Biden also winning Missouri, Mississippi, and Idaho. This morning, North Dakota and Washington still too close to call. The night, a major blow to Bernie Sanders. At home in Vermont, he skipped making a public address. With Biden's delegate lead now virtually insurmountable, his supporters like Congressman Jim Clyburn say it's game over.
I think it is time for us to shut this primary down. It's time for us to cancel the rest of these debates.
Biden and Sanders' first one-on-one debate matchup is still on for this Sunday in Arizona. But it won't just be fewer people on the stage. The DNC is canceling the live audience. Coronavirus this morning is forcing major changes to the campaign trail. Both candidates have already scrapped rallies and say they're now evaluating their plans for future events. Joe Biden is now actively trying to reach out and court Bernie Sanders' supporters. And this morning, that silence from the Sanders team is very telling. He has no campaign events scheduled, but we do know he is looking forward to that debate on Sunday. But at this point, more than anything, it may be an opportunity to simply try and influence policy decisions going forward. George Sanders' supporters admit this was a very tough night for him.
Okay, Mary, thanks. Let's get more on this now from our chief White House correspondent, John Carl. And John, you just look at the delegate math right now. All those states that Joe Biden has won, the lead he now has in delegates, it's just about impossible for Bernie Sanders to come back and get that majority of delegates going in to the convention. So the big question for him now is, how long can he stay in?
Well, he can stay in for a while, George, but Sanders' window of opportunity is slamming shut. He essentially needs to see the near total collapse of the Biden campaign to win. Instead, Biden is winning everywhere, winning in every region of the country, building up that formidable delegate leads, and he's crushing Sanders in the popular vote. So, George, next week you see 4 big states vote. These are all states, including Florida and Ohio, where Sanders lost 4 years ago. He really needs to win in places where he has not won before. There will be pressure on him to drop out. But remember, Bernie Sanders sees this as a movement. I suspect he'll be in for at least a while longer.
Meantime, this is not the outcome that President Trump wanted. How does this scramble his general election strategy?
Well, George, from the very beginning, Joe Biden was the candidate that the Trump team feared the most. And last night you saw why. He won in all of those places in Michigan where he would need to beat Donald Trump in a general election. And look at the overall turnout. Michigan had a record turnout for Democrats in a Democratic primary last night. That is a very troubling sign for the Trump team.
Yeah, you saw that in a lot of states last week as well. John Carl, thanks very much. We are following a lot of other stories this morning, including the St. Louis father under fire for taking his daughter to a school event despite a possible coronavirus case in their family. Now the question is, could he face legal trouble? And we want to go to Rob.
Hey, good morning, George. Good morning, everybody. Several pockets of some rough weather across the country, including southwestern corner, including San Diego, where I-5 southbound was shut down for a time yesterday. They got about a half an inch there in the city, about 2 inches in some areas, an inch in some of the desert areas of Palm Springs. They will take it, though. It's been a record dry February for the entire state of California. Arizona, New Mexico, you're going to get into it with this low. Meanwhile, this low and disturbance rolling across the midsection, the Ozarks getting some severe weather. Little Rock, Memphis, Tupelo. This will be your first of 2 days in Tennessee, where they just came off those tornadoes in the mid-state last week. Damaging winds, tornadoes tomorrow possible as well. It's time now for your Rainy Cities, brought to you by State Farm.
And we've upgraded her with the Sonic Shield and holographic mapping drones.
Impressive.
There is one more thing.
Jake from State Farm.
Here's the deal. With the Drive Safe and Save app, you'll also get rewarded for being a safe driver.
Now that is an upgrade.
Well played, Jake from State Farm. As usual.
When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Out the door to today, definitely jacket weather. You're going to need that jacket all day long. Instead of a high temperature of 72 degrees today, just 57 degrees. Can't rule out a little sprinkle or stray shower for your afternoon. Tomorrow, we're a little warmer, definitely on Friday, from 62 Thursday to 72 degrees on Friday. Know that on Friday, we'll be tracking maybe some morning showers, definitely breezy. And then right now, Saturday is looking like the best day out of the weekend. High temperature 58 degrees. High on Sunday, just 50 with clouds also around the area.
With Metro by T-Mobile, Daniela rules.
while pursuing her dream on the side, picking up shifts on the clock. I'll take the double. And taking things into her own hands. She's hustling to open a business